The sky above Terra Nova flickered unnervingly. A calm evening, just moments before the sun dipped below the horizon, now shattered as an unnatural ripple ran through the atmosphere. People stopped in their tracks, eyes scanning the heavens as the air turned electric. The hum of the city's life began to fade, replaced by an eerie silence, like the world was holding its breath. And then, without warning, a tear in the sky appeared. It wasn't a storm or a meteor. No thunderclap, no rumble. Just a jagged fracture, like reality itself had been sliced open. From the jagged edges, a bright, pulsating light shot through, too bright, too pure, like nothing found on Earth. For a brief moment, everything went white. Then, just as quickly as it had come, the tear closed. And in its wake, a child was gone. The mother, her eyes wide, her face frozen in disbelief, had seen it happen. 1 second, her daughter had been holding her hand, laughing at the shimmering sunset, and the next, she was gone. There were no traces, no sounds, no signs of struggle. The crowd stood around her, their faces a mix of confusion and fear. But no one had seen what had taken her. No one could explain it. Aliens, she whispered to herself, shaking her head in disbelief. That's impossible, that can't be real. Yet, as she gazed around at the frightened faces of people nearby, she realized they were all thinking the same thing. What if it's true? Mara Jensen didn't look like someone who could single-handedly take on an alien force. In fact, she looked more like a tired, overworked mother. Her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail, and a coffee cup permanently attached to her hand. She wore a faded t-shirt that had seen better days, and a pair of jeans that were way too loose around the waist. While other parents gathered around their sleek, futuristic vehicles and pristine clothing, Mara stood with her arms crossed, surveying the scene with the casual detachment of someone who had seen it all. Her daughter was missing. Her world had just been shattered, but here she was, standing in the middle of the most advanced, high-tech city on Earth, trying to find her child as if it were just another ordinary Tuesday. No panic, no dramatic breakdowns. Just one determined mother trying to make sense of an impossible situation. She wasn't a soldier, a scientist, or a government agent like the others. There were no shiny badges, no high-tech gadgets. Just a mother who knew how to fight for her family. Aliens, she muttered under her breath, adjusting the strap on her purse as she glanced up at the unblinking, cold sky. Right. Well, they won't get away with this. A few people in the crowd exchanged uneasy glances, wondering why a simple human like her would even think she stood a chance. But Mara wasn't bothered by their doubts. Her heart was racing, her mind already piecing together the next move. Everyone around her might have been looking for answers in books or data logs, but Mara knew something they didn't. The truth wasn't going to come from technology. It was going to come from her. With a defiant huff, she started walking toward the darkened edge of the city. Come on, she muttered to herself, shaking her head. Let's see what these aliens have really got. Mara Jensen's first challenge came not from the aliens themselves, but from the very people who should have been helping her. The Global Defense Agency, the very organization tasked with protecting humanity from extraterrestrial threats, had been in chaos ever since the event. While Mara was out searching for her daughter, the agency was busy with their usual protocols, analyzing data, maintaining control, and coordinating standard procedures. The last thing they needed was a civilian interfering with their classified operations. At the head of this cold, bureaucratic machine was Director Evelyn Kaur, a sharp, calculating woman who had been in charge for over a decade. A former military strategist, Kaur had risen to power through sheer efficiency, and her reputation was built on keeping everything tightly controlled. She had no tolerance for emotional outbursts, especially when dealing with something as serious as a potential alien threat. Mara didn't stand a chance in her eyes. You've seen the data, Ms. Jensen, Kaur said, her voice as rigid as the steel wall surrounding them. This isn't a situation we can simply run into with human emotion. Aliens, as much as we might dislike it, have advanced technology and capabilities far beyond our own. Mara stood her ground, eyes flashing with determination. I don't care about your data, Director. My daughter is out there. I know what I saw. The aliens took her, and I'm going to get her back. Kaur leaned forward, her fingers steepled in front of her. And you think you can just, what? Walk into their domain and bring her back? Alone? You have no training, no equipment. You're outclassed. The odds couldn't have been more stacked against her. The world's best agents, equipped with state-of-the-art technology, couldn't get close to finding the aliens, yet Mara, a simple, grieving mother with no combat training or alien knowledge, was determined to do what they couldn't. Cora's eyes narrowed. You'll be nothing more than a distraction. But Mara didn't flinch. Then maybe I'll be the distraction that works. Mara Jensen didn't look like someone who could single-handedly take on an alien force. In fact, she looked more like a tired, overworked mother, her hair pulled back in a messy ponytail and a coffee cup permanently attached to her hand. She wore a faded T-shirt that had seen better days, the fabric stretched out at the collar, and a pair of jeans that were a little too loose around the waist. While other parents gathered around their sleek, futuristic vehicles and pristine clothing, Mara stood with her arms crossed, surveying the scene with the casual detachment of someone who had seen it all. Her daughter, Lily, was missing. Her world had just been shattered, but here she was, standing in the middle of the most advanced high-tech city on Earth, trying to find her child as if it were just another ordinary Tuesday. No panic, no dramatic breakdowns, just one determined mother trying to make sense of an impossible situation. She wasn't a soldier, a scientist, or a government agent like the others. There were no shiny badges, no high-tech gadgets, just a mother who knew how to fight for her family. Aliens, she muttered under her breath, adjusting the strap on her purse as she glanced up at the unblinking, cold sky. Right. Well, they won't get away with this. Her mind was already racing, already formulating a plan that didn't rely on fancy technology or expert training, because, frankly, none of that had worked so far. The Global Defense Agency had their high-tech gadgets, their sleek spacecraft, their intelligent databases, and their shiny uniforms. Yet all they had managed to do was analyze the event, speculate, and sit around in their sterile offices, waiting for something to happen. They had no real answers. And they definitely had no action. So Mara was going to take action. The first step was simple. She needed to get herself inside the base, get to the head of the operation, and find out what they weren't telling her. It wasn't going to be easy. She wasn't supposed to be there. But then again, no one was supposed to be there. Not unless they were part of the select group of military-trained personnel who were being groomed for something bigger. Not unless they were someone with credentials. But Mara had something none of them had. A mother's heart, and determination that could bend steel if needed. Her hands gripped the steering wheel of her rusted, yet stubbornly reliable car. As she pulled into the high-security parking lot of the Global Defense Agency's headquarters, she couldn't help but grin at the sight of the massive steel gates and towering walls. High-tech vehicles zipped by her, their engines humming with advanced energy, while her own car sputtered and wheezed in protest, its rust spots catching the light like badges of honor. She wasn't intimidated, not in the least. In fact, the more she looked at all the elite agents, the more she felt oddly out of place, and in a good way. She wasn't here to play by their rules. She wasn't here to impress anyone with her credentials or military training. She was here for one thing, and one thing only, to get her daughter back. As Mara approached the main entrance, she could feel the stares of the guards at the checkpoint. They eyed her disheveled clothes and the oversized coffee cup in her hand, no doubt wondering what a mother in jeans and a T-shirt could possibly want inside the most advanced, most heavily guarded base on Earth. They had no idea. One of the guards stepped forward, his posture rigid, his face unreadable. "Ma'am, may I ask what your business is here?" Mara smiled at him, her eyes twinkling with mischievous intent. "Yeah, I'm just here for the aliens." The guard blinked at her in confusion. "Excuse me? The aliens?" Mara repeated with a shrug, as though it were the most normal thing in the world. "You know, the ones who decided to snatch up my kid." She took another sip of her coffee, enjoying the confused look on his face. "I'm here to find her. I've got a few questions, and I'm thinking you might have some answers." The guard exchanged a glance with his colleague, clearly unsure how to handle this situation. But it wasn't long before they both stepped aside, motioning for her to pass. "What's the worst that could happen?" Mara said under her breath, as she strolled past the stunned guards. Inside the facility, the atmosphere was nothing short of intimidating. Agents moved in a hurried, purposeful manner, their faces stoic as they navigated the sleek, futuristic hallways of the base. Everywhere Mara looked, she saw high-tech equipment. Screens blinking, holograms flickering, doors sliding open and shut with the soft hum of advanced machinery. Yet, despite the cutting-edge technology surrounding her, there was something remarkably cold about the entire place. It felt clinical, almost lifeless. In contrast, Mara's presence felt like a breath of fresh air. She wasn't here to impress anyone with her expertise or knowledge. She wasn't here to conform to anyone's expectations. As far as she was concerned, this was her mission now, and the best part was that no one had any idea what she was capable of, and she was going to keep it that way. After a few minutes of wandering through the sterile halls, dodging security officers and avoiding the obvious high-tech gadgets that were clearly designed to track and monitor every movement, Mara finally stumbled into the briefing room, where she was certain she'd find the information she needed. Inside, a group of officers were gathered around a large table, looking over data projections and discussing something in hushed tones. At the head of the table stood Director Evelyn Kaur, the woman in charge of Earth's entire defense strategy. Her sharp features and cold, calculating demeanor made her look like someone who had been trained to think 2 steps ahead of anyone else. It was no wonder she had been put in charge. But Mara wasn't here to play games. She didn't care about Kaur's military training or her high-ranking position. She was a mother, nothing more, nothing less, and this was her fight. When Mara entered the room, everyone fell silent. All eyes turned toward her, taking in the sight of the woman, who clearly didn't belong. "Can I help you?" Director Kaur asked, her voice calm but edged with an underlying tension. "Yep," Mara said nonchalantly. "I'm here to find my daughter. You know, the one the aliens took." Kaur's eyes narrowed as she studied Mara, her expression unreadable. "Ms. Jensen, this is a highly sensitive matter. We don't have time for emotional outbursts." Mara grinned, tossing her hair over her shoulder as she pulled a chair out from the table. "Well, that's your problem, isn't it? I don't have time for your highly sensitive nonsense either. My kid's out there somewhere, and I intend to find her, whether you like it or not." There was a long silence as everyone in the room tried to make sense of what was happening. But instead of growing more anxious or defensive, Mara remained eerily calm, almost too calm. Her eyes flicked to the projection screen, displaying alien data, and her lips curled into a slight smile. Director Kaur looked at her, clearly annoyed but unwilling to back down. "You don't understand the magnitude of what we're dealing with, Ms. Jensen. These beings—" "Aliens," Mara interjected casually, sipping her coffee. "Yeah, I get it. They took my daughter. So what's your plan, Director? You're just going to sit around and wait for them to make their next move? Or are you actually going to do something?" The officers around the table shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsettled by Mara's bluntness and disregard for their protocol. "Aliens are not something to be dealt with casually," Kaur said, her tone colder than ever. "You need training equipment and—" "Training?" Mara cut her off, her voice rising slightly. "What training? I don't need a fancy laser gun or some high-tech gadgets. What I need is to get in there and get my kid back. And I'm not waiting around for your perfect plan to save her. If you can't help me, I'll do it myself." The room fell silent again, and Mara's heart hammered in her chest, but she refused to back down. She wasn't going to let them talk her out of this. Kaur stared at her for a long moment, then exhaled slowly, as if weighing her options. "Fine," she said finally, "but I'm not sending you in alone." Mara raised an eyebrow. "I wasn't planning on it." Kaur turned toward one of the officers and nodded. "Get her equipped. We'll give her what she needs." Mara grinned and slapped the table. "Now we're talking." Mara's first test was not a battle against aliens or even military agents. No, it was something far more absurd. It was her very first challenge to prove she could go toe-to-toe with the Global Defense Agency's so-called elite. The agency had decided that if Mara wanted to help, she'd have to prove herself by going through a series of simulated trials designed to test her skills. Of course, they hadn't expected her to actually be good at any of it. They were preparing to showcase their technology and impressive skill sets. something that would make her look utterly out of place. What they didn't know was that Mara wasn't there to fit their mold. She was there to win, on her own terms. Mara entered the simulation room, a large, high-tech arena that looked like something out of a sci-fi movie. The floor was metallic, smooth and cold, with holographic projections of alien landscapes shifting in the background. She could feel the tension rising around her, the agents observing from behind reinforced glass windows, watching her every move with scrutiny. Her first opponent was a telekinetic soldier, tall, imposing, with piercing blue eyes that glowed faintly. The soldier stood across from Mara, his arms crossed and a calm expression on his face. He didn't need to say anything. His mind would do all the talking. "Ready?" the voice over the intercom asked, and before Mara could respond, the soldier lifted his hand, and a blistering gust of air erupted from nowhere, sending chairs and tables in the room flying toward her. Mara blinked once, then twice. She wasn't sure if it was shock or just disbelief that something so outlandish was happening. But there was no time to waste. With a dramatic sigh, Mara raised her hand as if casually swatting a fly. "Not today, buddy," she muttered under her breath. From her bag, she pulled out a small laser pointer, the kind she kept with her for presentations at work. It wasn't exactly the kind of tool anyone would expect to win a fight with, but Mara had other plans. She aimed it straight at the soldier's glowing eyes. A few things happened in rapid succession. The soldier's focus faltered as his eyes locked onto the tiny red. Then he began to fidget, shifting uncomfortably. His mind no longer felt entirely in control. The laser's red beam flickered across his field of vision, distracting him just enough. For a moment, Mara thought she saw a little twitch in his eye. It was almost as if he was trying to resist, try to fight the urge to focus on something so simple. But then, without warning, she broke into a full-on sprint, dodging debris as it flew past her, and tackled him square in the chest. The soldier, caught completely off guard, toppled backward, hitting the ground with an audible thud. Mara stood over him, hands on her hips, grinning like she'd just won a prize. Telekinetic or not, you can't beat a laser pointer. The room was dead silent for a few moments as the agents processed what had just happened. Then, to their surprise, they heard the sound of a muffled chuckle. It was one of the agents watching from behind the glass. She couldn't help herself. "Well, that was unexpected," the agent muttered. Mara stood and gave a casual shrug. "What can I say? Sometimes the classics work." The second match was against a shadow-shifting opponent, an agent capable of melting into the shadows, moving unseen and striking from angles that were nearly impossible to predict. A formidable foe by all accounts, and one that was designed to disorient and confuse. Mara squinted into the darkness as the agent faded into the shadows, his form becoming indistinguishable from the dim lighting in the room. But Mara wasn't worried. She had been through far worse. Instead of trying to anticipate his every move or waste time searching for him in the shadows, Mara simply pulled out her smartphone, the one thing she never went anywhere without. She tapped a few buttons, and before long, the room was filled with the sound of a high-pitched whistle that emanated from the phone speaker. It was a kind of sound designed to irritate, the kind that messed with the frequency-sensitive senses of any living creature, especially those using visual camouflage. A moment later, a figure appeared, clutching his ears and staggering backward as the sound pierced the air. It was a shadow-shifting agent, now fully visible as he struggled to block out the annoying sound. "Gotcha," Mara muttered with a grin. In an instant, she was on him, using her quick reflexes to grab him by the arm and slam him into the ground. The fight was over before it had even started. The last test came against a cybernetic soldier, half man, half machine, equipped with an array of laser-shooting arms and explosive capabilities. This one, Mara knew, would be a real challenge. She couldn't rely on distracting him with a laser pointer, and a phone whistle wouldn't work on someone with cybernetic enhancements. But as the agent stood in front of her, flexing his metal arms with mechanical precision, Mara had an idea, albeit an unorthodox one. With a smirk, she pulled out the bubble wrap she had packed earlier and began wrapping her hands in it, one by one. As she did, the cybernetic soldier stood motionless, watching her, a slight tilt of curiosity in his robotic eyes. "What's the plan here?" he asked, his voice as cold and mechanical as his body. Mara's grin widened. "I'm going to pop you." Without waiting for a response, she threw herself at him, her fists covered in bubble wrap, aiming for his joints. Every punch she landed sent a satisfying pop through the room, the sound echoing like a small explosion. The cybernetic soldier was momentarily stunned. His advanced sensory systems couldn't comprehend what was happening. He had never faced an opponent so ridiculous, so utterly human. Every time his body reacted to block or strike, it was met with another pop, a distraction, a sound that caused him to flinch, his cybernetic precision faltering for just a fraction of a second. And that fraction of a second was all Mara needed. With a quick jab, she hit him in the chest with such force that he stumbled back, unable to regain his balance. As he fell to the ground, she gave a loud cheer and slapped the bubble wrap off her hands. "Guess I'm too unpredictable," she said, popping another bubble for good measure. The room was stunned. The agents behind the glass exchanged incredulous looks. They had expected her to fail, or at the very least, struggle. But Mara had done what no one else had. She had won, each time, with nothing more than sheer willpower, creative thinking, and a touch of humor. As Mara walked out of the simulation arena, she couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. She wasn't the trained soldier, the advanced fighter, or the highly skilled agent. She was a mother who knew how to use whatever was at hand to get the job done. And no one, not even the most advanced technology or the most skilled soldiers, could take that away from her. She didn't need gadgets or enhancements. All she needed was her wits, her laser pointer, her bubble wrap, and the unwavering belief that she was going to get her daughter back. And with that, she marched forward, ready to face whatever came next. The alien command center was bathed in a cold blue light as Commander Zolrix watched the recordings of humans' matches, his 6 eyes narrowing as he observed every move she made. The holographic screens flickered with scenes from the simulations, showing Mara Jensen, untrained, unprepared, and yet somehow managing to outsmart and overpower her opponents with the most unorthodox of methods. Zolrix's sharp mandibles clicked in frustration as he studied her. He had been tasked with ensuring that the Earthlings, specifically this mother, Mara Jensen, would be nothing more than an amusing footnote in their experiment. She had been nothing but a distraction from the grander schemes of the intergalactic coalition. After all, humans were unpredictable, emotional creatures. They weren't built for combat, strategy, or survival at the highest levels. But every time he had dismissed her, she surprised him. On the screen, Mara tackled the telekinetic soldier. Her laser pointer distracted him long enough for her to pounce. Zolrix's mandibles clicked again, louder this time. This is not possible. Her next match, the shadow-shifting agent, was even more perplexing. Mara's smartphone had emitted an ear-piercing frequency that rendered the agent's invisibility useless, allowing her to overpower him with ease. Zolrix's antennae twitched with irritation. This was not how it was supposed to go. Every alien species that had ever attempted to infiltrate Earth had used superior technology or brute force. Mara's success wasn't due to superior intellect or technology. It was due to sheer randomness. He turned to one of his aides, a Gither, whose long, spindly limbs worked at a rapid pace on the control console. "Prepare the next opponent," Zolrix ordered, trying to maintain control of his growing unease. "Make sure the next one is formidable." Gither, an alien skilled in cybernetics, hesitated. "Commander, her unpredictability is—" He paused as if struggling to find the right words. "It is not something we have encountered before." Zolrix shot a glare at him. "I don't care about your psychological analysis. Make her fail." He swiveled back to the monitor. The image of Mara holding her bubble-wrapped fist in front of her against the cybernetic soldier flickered to life, her movements absurd, almost childlike. And yet she had won. The soldier had crumpled under the simplest of distractions, a childish toy of all things. Zolrix's mind reeled. The humans were supposed to be weak. They were supposed to be predictable. He had been told that their species, bound by emotional impulses, would break under pressure. But this woman, she seemed to defy everything Zolrix knew about strategy, about combat. His mind began to circle around this anomaly, a growing feeling of dread gnawing at the edges of his calm exterior. The commander's thoughts shifted as the arena replayed. He had seen warriors from dozens of planets, aliens trained in every form of combat imaginable. They fought with precision, with ritual, with honor. Combat had its rules. It had its traditions. Every species had its own fighting style, its own set of standards. There was respect in combat. But Mara didn't follow those traditions. She had no interest in what was proper, no interest in rules or honor or ritual. She simply adapted. She used whatever was available. She used humor, distraction, and raw human creativity. Weapons none of his adversaries had ever employed in the arena. She is breaking the game, Zolrix muttered under his breath. His compound eyes shimmered with a strange mix of anger and admiration. This human wasn't following prescribed order things. She was chaotic, a force that couldn't be calculated, couldn't be reasoned with, a true threat. He leaned forward, his mind shifting into higher gear. It wasn't about winning anymore. It wasn't about tradition. It was about survival. The Gither turned away from the console, sensing the change in Zolrix's mood. "Commander, are you suggesting we adjust the parameters of the next match?" Zolrix's eyes flashed, a signal of both resolve and anger. "We will not make adjustments. We will give her everything we have." The Gither's limbs froze. "But she will face something she cannot outwit," Zolrix said, his voice ice cold. "I will break her like all the others before her." For a moment, Zolrix's mind raced with countless possibilities. He had underestimated her. Humans had always been underestimated. They had the capability for brilliance, for innovation, but no one had considered that a human could break the very rules that govern the universe of combat. Zolrix's frustration began to bubble up again. How could this be? How had a simple human woman, a mother, with nothing but her wits, managed to upend everything they had planned? His claws twitched involuntarily as his thoughts drifted. He had seen many enemies bend before his will, many warriors fall to superior tactics. But Mara Jensen was different. She was not bound by the logic of warfare. She was free from the rules, free from tradition. And that made her the most dangerous enemy he had faced in millennia. Zolrix's mandibles parted slightly, revealing his sharp teeth. This will not be like the others. No more games. No more distractions. As he turned away from the monitor, his thoughts darkened. He had no intention of letting Mara continue. She was a threat. The rules of this contest would have to be rewritten, and she would be brought down, no matter what it took. And this time, there would be no distractions, no easy wins, no toys. The arena stood at the edge of the galaxy's most prestigious tournament. The final battle was just moments away. The grand coliseum of Nexus Prime buzzed with anticipation, a vast structure that dwarfed any human-made stadium. Hundreds of alien species filled the stands, their various forms shimmering in the light as they murmured to each other. The air was thick with tension, the hum of distant energy fields vibrating beneath the ground. Holographic displays projected images of the combatants in the final match. Two names flashing across the massive screens, Mara Jensen and Commander Zolrix. As Mara entered the arena, the crowd's murmurs became a cacophony. Mara Jensen, the human, the one who defied every expectation, who had outwitted and outlasted her opponents with nothing but her unconventional methods, her sheer unpredictability, was now a moment away from facing the most elite combatant in the galaxy, Commander Zolrix, the fearsome leader of the Galactic Dominion. The betting markets on every known planet had collapsed. Not a single analyst could predict the outcome, not even the most advanced supercomputers. The phrase error does not compute flashed across the betting screens as the odds of the final match were reset to unpredictable. The officials, who had once dismissed Mara as nothing more than a spectacle, now stared at her in disbelief. She had surpassed every single one of their tests. She was no longer a joke. She was a real threat. And her methods, they were causing chaos in their structured systems. Every victory had come down to improvisation, distraction, and innovation. There was no strategy they could counter, no preparation that could prepare them for her next move. In the front rows, Agitha spectated, his long limbs twitching with unease. He had witnessed Mara's matches, and his belief in tradition was shaken. He leaned toward an advisor, his voice a low whisper. "I've seen combat, but nothing like this. She doesn't fight by the rules. She doesn't even know the rules. And yet she's winning." The advisor shifted uncomfortably. "It's a paradox. She's a problem that our models can't solve. The way she uses simple objects to disrupt elite combatants. It's as though she has no care for strategy, no care for victory. She's simply playing." "Playing?" The Gither's voice took on a grim tone. "This is not a game. She is a threat. And Zolrix, he does not take kindly to unpredictability." Meanwhile, on the floor below, Mara stood in the preparation area, her nerves tingling with anticipation. The uniform she wore, simple and practical, was a far cry from the ceremonial armor worn by her opponents. Mara adjusted her wristband, checking her laser pointer one last time, and pulled out her familiar bubble wrap. The whole thing felt absurd, but she had learned by now that absurdity was a good weapon. She had spent her entire life solving problems with what was at hand, whether it was at work, at home, or now, in this intergalactic contest of survival. There was no grand speech or dramatic moment, no final prayer, just a quiet, resolute focus. This was her fight, and it was for her daughter. Across from her, Zolrix stood, his tall, muscular form encased in his heavy combat armor, his eyes, cold, calculating, and ancient, locked onto hers. He exuded an aura of certainty, of overwhelming confidence. He had dominated every battle before. His people had conquered galaxies with discipline and precision, but Mara's unorthodox methods had rattled him. She didn't play by the rules, and he hated it. A voice over the intercom cut through the tension. "The final match begins now." As Mara took her first step into the central arena, the crowd's noise escalated. Alien spectators, beings from 1,000 worlds, packed the stands, some of them gaseous, others crystalline, some shape-shifting, some made entirely of energy. They all seemed to pulse with excitement. The energy of the entire galaxy focused on this moment. But the whispers were louder than the cheers. "How is she still here?" a Krakenar warrior muttered, his low voice rumbling through the air. "No one expected a human to make it this far. What's her secret? What is she?" Another voice, this time from a Clathrian diplomat, said, "This is an embarrassment. She doesn't even have the proper training. Zolrix will annihilate her." But a third voice, belonging to a retired combat master, spoke more thoughtfully. "I've watched her battles. She has no strategy, no technique. But somehow she keeps winning. Maybe that's her strength." The crowd's chatter grew louder, but none could deny the mounting suspense. For all their sophisticated technology, all their military might, they couldn't understand Mara Jensen, and that, in itself, made her dangerous. The officials were growing nervous. They had seen every match unfold, but nothing like this. Zolrix was their golden child, the one they had groomed for victory, the one they had placed their betting futures on, the one who had never lost. Yet, Mara had beaten each of his challengers, and every time, it was in the most ridiculous way imaginable. The bubble wrap, the laser pointer, the humor. Her methods defied all logic. One of the lead officials turned to the other. "What if she wins? What does that mean for us? What does that mean for the tournament?" The other official's eyes darted nervously toward the arena, where Mara was stretching in preparation for her final battle. "If she wins, it means we have to rewrite everything, and we might not survive the fallout." On the other side of the arena, Zolrix flexed his arms inside his suit. The air around him hummed with power. His gaze locked onto Mara with a look of cold determination. This human had pushed him to the brink, had made a mockery of his skills and his pride. But now this was the moment, the final fight. He stepped forward, his voice carrying across the arena, amplified by the echoing speakers. "Human, you have defied the laws of combat, but you will not defy me." Mara looked him dead in the eyes, her stance relaxed, her expression calm. "We'll see about that, won't we?" The announcer's voice rang out, cutting through the silence. "Final match, begin!" The entire arena fell silent. Every creature, every spectator, every official was on edge, waiting for the first move, the first sign of what would happen next. Mara stood ready. Zolrix took a step forward. Then, in the blink of an eye, Mara pulled out her laser pointer and aimed it directly at Zolrix's eyes. The crowd gasped, unsure whether to cheer or jeer. Zolrix, taken off guard for a split second, staggered back, the bright red flashing in his eyes, forcing his focus to break. This was her method, simple, unpredictable, human, and it was shaking the foundation of combat as they knew it. The stakes had never been higher. It was no longer just about victory. It was about proving that unconventionality could trump tradition and that one mother's love for a child could outsmart an entire galaxy of warriors. As the match began in earnest, Mara's smile flashed for the briefest moment. No one expected her to be here, but here she was, and she wasn't backing down. The grand coliseum of Nexus Prime thrummed with the energy of 1,000 worlds, each spectator leaning forward in eager anticipation. This wasn't just any battle. This was the final confrontation. Tradition versus chaos. Precision versus adaptability. The stakes could not have been higher. On one side, Commander Zolrix stood tall, his shimmering combat armor reflecting the harsh lights above. His stance was calculated, his movements deliberate. Every inch was being the epitome of discipline. He had mastered combat for centuries, and today he would prove that the old ways were superior, that order and control would always defeat randomness. Across from him, Mara Jensen stood, a woman who had been nothing more than an anomaly just weeks ago. A human, a mother who had no formal training, no special gifts, just a mind that was quick to adapt and a heart that refused to back down. She was unassuming, but her determination was like a force of nature. She cracked her knuckles, looking around the arena for any possible advantage. All right, Zolrix, let's see what you've got. She smiled to herself, her eyes gleaming with defiance. The announcer's voice boomed through the air, the sound reverberating off the walls of the arena. Final match. Zolrix, commander of the Galactic Dominion, versus Mara Jensen, the human wild card. May the best fighter win. A pulse of energy surged through the arena, signaling the start of the fight. The crowd fell into a stunned silence. Zolrix didn't waste a moment. With the speed of an apex predator, he launched forward, his blades extended and ready to strike. His movements were fluid, a blur of precision, every motion honed through millennia of training. But Mara was already a step ahead. As Zolrix lunged toward her, she sidestepped with a grin, narrowly dodging his strike. The crowd gasped in surprise. No one expected a human to be that fast, that aware. With a flick of her wrist, Mara activated her laser pointer, aiming directly at Zolrix's eyes. The red beam flashed across his face, momentarily disorienting him. His movement stuttered, the calculated assassin momentarily thrown off balance. Nice try. Mara chuckled, her voice carrying across the arena. But I bet you didn't expect this, huh? Zolrix growled, wiping his eyes. His gaze locked onto her, fury building behind his cold, calculating exterior. This human, this wild, chaotic creature, had no respect for the traditions of combat. She wasn't following any of the rules. And yet, she was still standing, still winning. He raised his hand, sending out a shockwave of energy from his suit, a devastating blast designed to obliterate anything in its path. The wave of power surged toward Mara, the air crackling with intensity. But Mara, with her usual courageous unpredictability, didn't hesitate. She pulled out her bubble wrap and threw it in the air, just as the shockwave hit. The force of the blast sent the bubble wrap tumbling in every direction, and for a brief moment, the arena was filled with the sound of popping bubbles. Zolrix's eyes widened in disbelief. The explosion of bubbles somehow absorbed the impact, leaving Mara untouched. The absurdity of it all struck the crowd dumb for a moment before a few scattered laughs rippled through the stands. Mara's voice rang out with her signature, wry humor. See? It's the simple things that work. Zolrix's rage was palpable now. He launched himself into the air, summoning his quantum blades, weapons capable of slicing through anything in seconds. He moved with precision, striking in a perfect arc toward Mara's midsection. But Mara wasn't about to be outdone. With an almost comically small handheld mirror, she reflected the light back into Zolrix's eyes, temporarily blinding him. He staggered in midair, his flight pattern faltering. It was a brief moment of vulnerability, but it was enough. Mara didn't hesitate. She rolled under him, using her momentum to spring back to her feet, just as Zolrix crashed into the ground. The impact sent a shockwave through the arena, but Mara was already a few steps ahead, crouched and poised to strike. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. The crowd was baffled. Zolrix, who had been unstoppable, was now being outmaneuvered by a human. His traditional methods, his precision, his control, were being dismantled by Mara's chaotic, improvised tactics. In the stands, the spectators were in shock. The Gither, the Krokenar, the Clathrians, they had all expected Zolrix to dominate. But now, they were watching in awe as this human, this mother, was doing what no one thought possible. Zolrix's voice crackled over the intercom as he spoke to himself, low and furious. You cannot win. He had been trained for combat, for order, for control. He had faced some of the greatest minds in the galaxy. But this human, this woman, she was reckless, untamed, and it was starting to feel like she couldn't be beaten. But Zolrix refused to lose. His mind raced for a solution. With a growl, he slammed his fists together, summoning a temporal distortion field around himself. The very fabric of time began to warp, twisting into a swirling mandala of energy. For a moment, the world around him slowed, as though time itself had been rewound and retwisted in 100 different directions. This was his signature move, a legendary temporal assault. It was designed to disorient, to destroy. But Mara didn't flinch. She had seen time loops before, on Earth, in movies, in books. She had a plan. She pulled out her smartphone and opened a metronome app. Turns out resonant frequencies work wonders in temporal constructs, she said, grinning. She held the phone up, the metronome ticking at a rhythmic pace. The sound reverberated through the air, disrupting Zolrix's carefully constructed time loop. The waves of sound interfered with the temporal distortion, causing his attack to unravel and collapse in on itself. Zolrix screamed in frustration as his powers fizzled out, the energy field dissipating into nothing. The crowd erupted in wild applause, the impossible now tangible. Mara Jensen, the human, had done it. She had defeated Zolrix's greatest weapon with nothing more than a metronome app. Zolrix, his breath ragged and furious, stumbled backward. His precision, his control, his very understanding of combat had been upended. He was no longer the unbeatable predator he had once been. Mara took a step forward, her eyes blazing with resolve. You may have tradition and control, but I have chaos and love, and that's all I need. With one final swing of her arm, Mara used a bubble wrap once more, distracting Zolrix long enough to disarm him. The final blow landed. Zolrix, stunned and disoriented, crumpled to the ground. The arena was silent for a heartbeat. Then the applause erupted. Mara had done the impossible. She had won. The grand coliseum of Nexus Prime had fallen silent, save for the steady hum of the arena's energy fields. The battle was over, but the reverberations of what had just transpired would be felt across the galaxy for eons. The crowd, once divided by species and tradition, was now united in astonishment. Mara Jensen, a human, a mother with no formal training, had just defeated the undefeatable. She had outsmarted the greatest combatant the galaxy had ever known, and she had done it with improvisation, humor, and a heart full of defiance. Zolrix, the mighty commander of the Galactic Dominion, lay at her feet. His once imposing presence was now diminished, his confidence shattered. But it wasn't just his pride that had been wounded. It was the very idea of what it meant to be a warrior, a leader in a galaxy built on rules and tradition. The arena had gone quiet as Zolrix struggled to his knees, his eyes filled with a mix of fury and reluctant admiration. His voice, barely a whisper, echoed in the stillness. You shouldn't have been able to do this. Mara didn't respond immediately. She stood there, letting the weight of the moment settle in her chest. For a fleeting moment, she allowed herself to breathe, to take in the enormity of what she had just achieved. She had won, against impossible odds, against an entire galaxy of tradition. Mara's voice cut through the silence, soft but certain. It wasn't about winning. It was about believing that I could, even when no one else did. Her words lingered in the air, hanging between her and the commander. She took a step back, her eyes scanning the now quiet arena. The officials, the spectators, all had witnessed what had just occurred. They had watched her turn the very concept of combat on its head, breaking every rule that had once been unchallenged. She looked at the audience, her voice carrying with unexpected authority. Maybe the galaxy's been wrong all along. Maybe it's time to stop following the same old playbook. Change isn't something to fear. It's something to embrace. The crowd, still stunned, began to murmur. Whispers of realization started to spread like wildfire. Mara's methods, chaotic and unconventional, had shown them something new. That victory didn't always have to be about precision and control. Sometimes it was about adaptability, heart, and the willingness to risk everything for what you believed in. Zulrich slowly stood up, wiping the dust from his armor. The cold, calculating warrior who had once been the pinnacle of power now seemed smaller. His gaze met Mara's, and for the first time, there was respect in his eyes. "You've broken more than just my armor," he said quietly. "You've shattered everything I've ever known. You've made me question the very nature of what it means to be a warrior." Mara nodded, the weight of his words sinking in. This wasn't just a victory over him. It was a victory over all the systems, all the forces that had ever tried to dictate how combat in life should be. Perfection, she realized, was never the goal. Evolution was. The arena began to come alive with applause, hesitant at first, but soon swelling into a powerful roar. It wasn't just a cheer for Mara's victory. It was a cheer for change, for the realization that the old ways were no longer enough. The Gither warriors in the stands exchanged glances, murmuring among themselves. One spoke up, his voice thoughtful. Perhaps there's something to what she said. Perfection isn't always the answer. We may need to rethink the way we fight, the way we live. A crocodile diplomat nodded, his tentacles twitching in contemplation. Yes, chaos doesn't always destroy. Sometimes it creates. Maybe it's time for us to evolve. Back in the preparation area, Mara felt a wave of relief wash over her. It wasn't just the battle she had won. It was a battle for perspective, the battle to see the world differently, and to prove that anyone, no matter their background or training, could change the course of destiny if they were willing to break the mold. She looked around at the officials and competitors who had once dismissed her, now staring at her with a mixture of awe and uncertainty. It was in that moment that she realized just how powerful her methods had been. She had disrupted not just the combat hierarchy, but the entire way the galaxy saw itself. Zulrich's voice came again, but this time it held a different tone, one of reflection. "Mara Jensen, I don't know what the future holds, but I do know this. You made me see that the galaxy doesn't need warriors like me. It needs innovators." Mara smiled, the weight of the moment sinking in. This wasn't just about winning a fight. It was about changing the rules, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been told they didn't belong. Perfection, as Zulrich had said, left no room for growth. But imperfection, chaos, even, could inspire something more powerful, evolution. She turned to leave the arena, the crowd's cheers still ringing in her ears. But she didn't do it for them. She did it for her daughter, for every mother who had ever fought for their child, for every person who had ever been told they didn't fit into someone else's vision of the world. She had broken the mold, and in doing so, she had shown the galaxy that anyone could change the game, even a mother. Reflection. As Mara made her way back to her quarters, she allowed herself a moment to reflect. Victory wasn't just about winning the fight. It was about changing the very foundation of what others believed was possible. The galaxy had been built on tradition, on rules, on what was considered perfect. But in the end, it wasn't perfection that made her victorious. It was her willingness to question, to adapt, and to never let go of her love and purpose. And in doing so, she had proven that sometimes it's the most chaotic paths that lead to the greatest transformations. As Mara walked off the platform, the weight of her victory still sinking in, the arena buzzed with excitement. But even as the cheers continued to echo through the Colosseum, something told her that this was just the beginning. The galaxy, still reeling from her unexpected triumph, had begun to change, whether it was ready for it or not. Behind her, Zulrich stood, his gaze fixed on her retreating figure. His mind was already turning, calculating the next move in the wake of this unprecedented defeat. The old ways had been shattered, but the question now was, what would come next? Elsewhere, in dark corners of the galaxy, new figures were watching, assessing, waiting. They had been quiet until now, lurking in the shadows, but they had seen the disruption Mara had caused. They knew the time for silence was over. As Mara stepped into her quarters, her communicator buzzed with a new message. The simple words that flashed across the screen were enough to make her pause. "We need to talk." She stared at the message, a mix of curiosity and caution creeping in. There was no signature, no indication of who had sent it. But Mara knew that nothing was ever simple anymore. The victory had opened doors, and she wasn't sure whether those doors would lead to allies or enemies. The universe, it seemed, was watching, and if her fight against Zolrix had taught her anything, it was that change didn't come without a cost. With a deep breath, Mara replied, "Let's see what comes next." As she hit send, the hum of the ship's engines vibrated beneath her feet. The journey ahead was unknown, but one thing was certain. Wherever it led, she would never back down. The camera pulled back, the vastness of space stretching out before her. Somewhere in the distance, a shadow stirred, a reminder that even in a galaxy on the brink of evolution, there were still secrets to uncover and new battles to face. The universe had been shaken, but it was far from over.